saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the wise men. Then was fulfilled what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled, because they are no more. When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead." Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there, and after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He will be called a Nazarene. The Gospel of the Lord. A reminder, if you got one of the poinsettias, you can take that after church today. So as I mentioned in the announcements, it's the fifth day of Christmas, so normally when we talk about the fifth day of Christmas, we talk about the 5 golden rings, or we talk about keeping the season. But today, because it's December 29th, this is the day that the church honors the slaughter of the holy innocents, the children of Bethlehem who are killed by Herod as he tries to brutally suppress what he sees as a threat to his rule. And so it's sort of a unconventional Christmas topic. There's only one Christmas carol that deals with this. It's the Coventry Carol. If you've heard that, maybe you've heard that and you'll go, that's what that's about. But if you listen to the words of the Coventry Carol, it's a lullaby to the children of Bethlehem. And it means that we have to wrestle with one of the topics that's sort of unusual, which is Christmas and monsters. We have to talk about the intersection of Christmas and monsters. Now again, maybe people have like the Krampus, or they have sort of these creatures that attend Christmas as a kind of sideshow. But here we're talking about real monstrosities, people who wield the power and threat of death, people who keep other people enslaved by the fear of the power of death, and our monster today is Herod. Now, if you're a reader of the Bible, you'll know that the Bible has a lot of monsters in it. We have kind of legendary beasts like the Leviathan, this deep sea monster, or Behemoth, this land monster. Kind of deep in the back of the Bible's imagination is this memory of these giant monsters that God made. Maybe for us it would be like the dinosaurs, things that existed hundreds of millions of years ago, but were part of God's fun creation. But when we get into the period of history, say the last 5,000 years, where human beings have recorded a coherent history of the world and culture, or human cultures, then we start to see monsters in a different way. So when prophets have dreams, when different things are unveiled, oftentimes the monsters of the Bible are these strange amalgamations of different animals that have been squished together, so that not only are they frightening, but they're just disgusting. They might have a part of a bear, part of a lion. They might have metal teeth. They might have, they're this really strange collection, this menagerie of monsters. But whenever the Bible talks about monsters, for the most part, they're talking about human beings. So the monsters, as they appear to God, are monstrous, but the monsters, as they appear to us, look just like us. In fact, they are us. And so sometimes you'll get monsters who represent the whole, a regime. It'll be a series of kings right in a row or something like that. And so the monster today is Herod. Now, certain quarters of history call Herod Herod the Great. And they call him Herod the Great because he was a builder. And anytime you've built large-scale building projects that have lasted, you get some points in history. So, he built the Western Wall in Jerusalem, the only part of the temple platform that's left. Herod did this huge expansion of the temple platform that was mostly destroyed except for this wall. He built Masada, he built Sebast, he used innovations in concrete. And I mean, he did a lot of stuff that architecturally and engineering-wise is interesting, but he was a monster. Now, he was trying to become the client king of Rome, and he actually ended up backing Mark Antony, and that didn't go very well for him because, of course, Mark Antony lost. But he proved his usefulness to Octavius, who would become Caesar Augustus, who let him stay this client king. And he was so concerned that there were going to be challenges to his rules that he ended up killing 3 of his own children that he saw as potential threats to the regime that he was creating. So Caesar Augustus once said, "I'd rather be one of Herod's pigs than one of his sons." And that was because Herod was trying to keep Jewish law, and so he would be nicer to pigs than he would be to his sons. So this is the kind of guy we're talking about. And it won't be the only time that he wields violence or wants to wield violence to try and generate some kind of response or some kind of movement in history. When he died, he knew that people probably weren't going to be that sad that he died, so he instructed that he drew up a list and he said, "When I die, bring all these people to Jerusalem and kill them so that people will have a reason to cry when I'm dead." And so his kids go, "Okay, Dad." And they didn't. He died, and they didn't do that. But that just gives you a sense of the man's mentality, this monster. And this monster is the person, throughout all of the Bible, the person who's probably most interested in Christmas. That's the surprising detail, I think, of the Christmas story, that for all the people who should be or could be interested in the gift of Messiah, in the gift of the King, the person who's most interested in Christmas is the monster, because he recognizes in Christmas a legitimate threat to the world in which death and the power of death and fear of the power of death is wielded and used to shape history. And so if anyone recognizes what Christmas could be, even if it's just an inkling, it's Herod. And so that's why he calls the wise men. That's why he calls the leaders of Jerusalem. He searches the scriptures. He looks at the astrological charts. He wants all the details so that he can worship the kid, of course, only to eliminate him. And when we get to the gospel this morning and we get this story about the children of Bethlehem being slaughtered, Herod decides he better cover all his bases, so he sets this 2-year window that any child who could possibly have been the child in the last 2 years would be killed. This day in the church's calendar is kind of like our Sandy Hook. You know, like when Sandy Hook happened, that horrible, dreadful murdering of children in a school, 20 children, that's like Bethlehem. And it was probably the same number of kids. Bethlehem wasn't a very big town, but it was probably the same number of kids. And so this senseless, brutal, anti-life violence is something familiar to us as Americans. It's something that we can recognize and something that probably a lot of people have experienced when monsters use violence to try and further their own aims through the power of death, and innocent people suffer, especially children. Oftentimes, children are the ones that suffer most for the bad ideas of adults. I remember once I was at the deathbed of a man who had been in D-Day. He had been at Utah Beach. And we were talking, and he said, "Yeah, when I think about what I did and where we went and the things," he said, "I've always thought ever since then that war is old men's revenge with young men's lives." And he said, we were sent in. He was very proud of his service, and he served with distinction. But as he was coming near to the end of his life, he was talking about how other people's use of violence became a burden to oftentimes the younger generation of people. And so this is where we find ourselves at Christmas with this horrific story of children murdered by a monster, and Joseph and his family being led into a kind of refugee status. I mean, think about it. Joseph's sitting there, they go to bed one night, he gets a dream going, "Get up, time to go." He has to get up and leave. He doesn't go, "Well, Mary, what do you think? Do you think we should go? Do you think we should stay? What do you think we should do?" He gets up and he heads into an uncertain future. And then he's in Egypt after a while. He gets another dream going, go back. And then he gets up and he goes back. Joseph is constantly being led by these holy dreams where God is protecting the life of the child. It's similar to the plot of The Mandalorian, if you've been watching that on Disney+. This idea that the child has to have his life preserved. But that won't be the story. The child's life doesn't have to be preserved for a kind of indefinite future. But we recognize that at the beginning, the child... Well, let me say again what I just tried to say. Joseph fleeing to Egypt is Jesus experiencing in himself a recapitulation of Israel's own history. He's going to go to Egypt like Israel went to Egypt. He's going to leave Egypt like Israel left Egypt. He's going to end up across the Jordan River like they were across the Jordan River. Jesus in his own life is going to recapitulate the entire history of his people from Judea to Egypt to back and so on. But the monstrosity of Herod is such that we also get the horizon of his service, that he is not coming to avoid death, but rather he is coming to break the power of death. And this becomes the important message of Christmas. Jesus comes amongst us so that eventually he can go to the cross. The cross is the place that he is called to. The cross is the place that he freely embraces, not because he can't think of anything else to do, or it was just an accident that finally someone got him. Herod the father didn't get him, but Herod the son gets him. That's not the meaning of the story. The whole point is God himself comes amongst us at Christmas because we live in a world filled with monsters. And God himself is going to use the tools of the monsters to undo their power. And this is the gift of Christmas. God is going to undo the tools of the monsters by using their power of death to undo death. So Jesus will embrace the cross. Jesus will embrace the suffering that comes with the cross. Jesus will take all of that into himself so that humanity's no to God, no with a capital N and an exclamation point, our no to God will become God's way of saving us. And that way, monsters can be transformed from who they are into who they should be, shaped into the image of being a God-bearer. This is our call as human beings, to bear the image of God, to help uncover that in the faces of other people, to be the bearer of God's image. And too often, especially through violence, through threat of violence, and through death, and the power of death, the image of God is disfigured, defaced, turned into something monstrous, and human beings become something different than they are. That's why sometimes if you've ever seen a person who gets insanely angry, their face changes. Sometimes their whole energy changes, but literally, when we get in the presence of some of this darkness, it changes our face, it changes our appearance. And part of what Christmas is doing is securing the image of God again. So today is kind of a hard day. To be like, well, we're from Christmas and we have New Year's coming, and it'd be nice just to have something relaxing. And then we get sort of this breaking news of the children of Bethlehem slain. And we wonder for what and why, and all the questions that always happen after like a Sandy Hook or after something difficult. How did this happen? How does it not happen again? And we just have sort of a cascading sense of these news and these events. With this breaking news of Bethlehem, we get a clear idea of the playing field of Christmas, that God is going to break the power of death so that nothing can separate the world from his love and being the bearers of his face. Amen. You're invited to stand.